The two surviving leaders of one of Turkey's bloodiest coups stand trial for an alleged crackdown on political freedom, mass arrests and executions. But why now? Will it heal Turkey's past wounds, or will it further strain relations between the country's military and civilian leaders? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. He symbolised a time in Turkey dominated by military rule. Now, more than 30 years later, what was unimaginable for many is happening. Turkey's former president, retired General Kenan Evren, as well as the former Air Force commander Tahsin Şahinkaya, who until recently had immunity from prosecution, are standing trial for their leading roles in the 1980 coup. But in what's been described as a historic moment for Turkey, the man who once said he'd rather commit suicide than face trial is now being held to account. Gonca Şenay reports from Ankara.
They've come in the thousands to see two former generals stand trial. Citizens, non-governmental organizations, even members of parliament are seeking to be plaintiffs. They want their grievances heard during the trial. The defendants led a military coup in 1980. Kenan Evren and Tahsin Şahinkaya dramatically changed Turkey's political and social landscape. For 3 years after the coup, they ran the country under military rule. More than 500,000 people were detained. Many were tortured and died in jail. 50 people were hanged.
Evlerimiz basıldı, sebepsiz yere gözaltına alındı.
Our houses were stormed, we were taken into custody without any particular reason, we were subjected to torture. We came here today to be co-plaintiffs.
My father and husband were tortured on September 12, 1980. They were detained. We experienced the tragedy along with them, so today we're applying to be co-plaintiffs and call them into account.
Both men are now in poor health and are not expected to appear in court. Their testimonies instead will probably be heard by video link.
Outside the courthouse, the crowds are gathered calling for justice. This is the trial they thought they would never see until a referendum 2 years ago removed the former general's immunity.
Of particular interest is Kenan Evren. The 94-year-old was military chief of staff when he overthrew the government. He went on to become president from 1982 to 1989. He has been quoted as saying he has no regrets about the coup, arguing it restored order after thousands of people died in street violence between the far left and far right. Evren and his ex-colleague are charged of crimes against the state and could face life imprisonment. Even if they are convicted, many expect they won't go to jail because of their old age. But the trial is being viewed as an important step in addressing a bitter chapter of Turkey's history. Gonca Şenay, Jazeera, Ankara.
So would this trial heal Turkey's wounds? To help us answer this question, we're joined by our panel of experts on Turkey. In Istanbul, Ergun Babahan, a columnist at the Star newspaper. Also in Istanbul, Hassan Koni, a professor of international law at the University of Culture. And in New Jersey, in the United States, Akin, Unver, a lecturer of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton University. Welcome to you all. If I can start with you, Ergun, we have a trial that started today. The two defendants, one is 94, the other one is 86 years old. They're too unwell to come to the court. What's the point of pursuing a trial against these two elderly, frail men?
Actually, main issue here is to prove the strength of the democracy and giving a kind of lesson young officers not to do or even try that kind of intervention to the democratic process. When you try that kind of people in court, you will have a objective decision about the actions happened in 1980, but unfortunately this court does not cover the events that happened after the military coup. People killed during the military rule or tortured, hanged, whatever you name it. So it's important, but I think it's one step behind in the process. In my opinion, it shouldn't be only an accusation for democracy or intervention in the politics, closing down the parliament or political parties, but they also committed crimes which can be labeled as crime against humanity. But unfortunately, the prosecutor didn't go that far and wanted to keep the accusation only taking the power from the civilian government.
Hassan, can I ask you about that? Do you agree that this is an important trial which is giving lessons for the future?
That's true. I mean, this will give an example, and this example is already given in different parts of the world. Because between 1960 and 1980, all around the developing world, in the Middle East, especially in the Latin America, in Turkey, in Asia, there were military coups. So this was the time, this 20 years, time of the military coups all over the world, mostly the country that have ties with the Western powers. Now, after the democratization of 1991 and liberalization of the countries from the Soviet Union, democratization in this kind of a developing countries started around the Middle East and Latin America and in Asia too. So there were similar trials, as you know, in Latin America. I remember General Pinochet of Chile, and here too, just an example, because it's a late trial, not to happen again. So it's a kind of democratization, and this will follow like this.
OK, Akin in New Jersey, you're our historian on the panel. I'd like you to take our viewers back, just give them a little bit of a snapshot of the 12th of September 1980. What exactly happened on that day, and set it in context for us.
Well, basically, a lot of people argue that the fight between the Iron Curtain and the Western Alliance never took on a violent form. It was a Cold War all along. But basically, historians of Turkey would concede that it actually took on a violent form in Turkey. In many ways, Turkey was the frontier post of NATO and did surveillance and, for example, spying missions on Soviet Russia. And in many ways, in terms of basically supporting leftist groups and right-wing groups and their violent street clashes, that confrontation of Cold War actually took on a violent form in Turkey, and it basically started in the 1960s. Hence, 1971, the second coup in Turkey happened because of then the government of Demirel not being able to intervene and stop this violence. And after 1971, this polarization between left-wing and right-wing radical groups escalated. And basically by 1978 and 1979, it took on such a disastrous form that basically the coup of 1980 happened. Now, I find it a little interesting that much of the people who support the coup against the court case against the coup right now, basically much of them supported the coup itself in 1980, and I find this problematic because back then the coup was seen initially as, for example, saving the society from violence, but it's actually what happened after the coup. Basically, two of our panelists touch upon this. Widespread and systematic use of torture as well as killings, what made that 1980 coup notorious. For example, you would see that much of the leadership of today's Justice and Development Party basically left untouched by the 1980 coup. It basically harmed the left-wing groups, socialist groups, and radical left-wing groups, communist groups, more than anyone else.
Let me bring in Ergun on some of the things that you've said there. In terms of this in the Cold War scenario, Ergun, what was the role, in your view, of the United States in all this? Lots of allegations have been made in the intervening years that they actually were backing this coup quite enthusiastically.
Sure. First, let me object to what was said before, because before the coup, military rule declared by the parliament was in effect, but people were still killing each other. As soon as the coup d'etat happened, the bloodshed stopped immediately, the day after the military coup. Then it shows that they let the bloodshed so they can take the power from the civilian government. And we believe in Turkey in general, generally, in military there is a very strong ties with Pentagon and the United States. Without approval or some kind of way showing, there won't be any military coup in Turkey, as we witnessed. In the last 10 years, there were some attempts, but all of them were foiled with the help of the United States. We know it very well, and it's for sure.
Can I ask you, Hassan, what do you believe will be the line of defence by the defendants here? How are they going to try and defeat these charges against them?
All right. I mean, anyway, they are too old to be tried, and any punishment at this ages will be not so useful for them. I mean, not for the other people who were tortured, because most of them are dead now. It's been 32 years. If they were 40 or 60, they are all gone. But it will give an example. And how they will defend, they will say that it was the prominence of communism, and there were clashes within the society between the nationalist right and the extreme left, and most of the people were living in fear. So in order to protect the Turkish constitution and to bring an order, we have to do it. And also they were supported by the Western powers at that time. So the same thing was happening, as I said before, in Latin America too. How they defend themselves, they will say the same words. It was the conjuncture of the times. Because of the conjuncture of the times, everything did happen, and they had to interfere.
Ergun, can I ask you? Can I ask Ergun now? It's his turn. Can I ask you about the mood of people now as this trial is taking place? Would you say most people support this trial?
Actually, as with other incidents, society divided mostly into two: those who support AK Party and its policies, or who voted for the constitutional referendum, the vote of yes, are supporting the case. And Ergenekon and other military coup attempts in trial show that military coups not just taking the power, they are planning, organizing, and committing crimes to be able to convince the people that it is necessary for military to come and take the power. When we look at the cases in front of the courts today, for example, prosecutor in Hrant Dink cases, when a prominent Armenian journalist who was killed in 2007, claims that it was conducted, organized, and committed by groups with direct ties to Ergenekon, but he's unable to prove it.
Okay.
So,
okay, again. Well, I want to come to Ergenekon in a moment, because we do want to widen the discussion, and it is clear that the tension between the civilians and the militaries have not been settled fully in Turkey, and Evren's not the only military official who's about to go on trial. In fact, last month, the former military chief of staff, İlker Bazberg, went on trial charged with terrorism. He's accused of leading a network of nationalists known as Ergenekon, who prosecutors say plotted to overthrow Prime Minister Erdogan's government in 2003. But Bazberg claimed the trial was a farce and simply a means to discredit the military. If you could, Akin, could you place this in context for us? Because I think there are a lot of people watching this around the world who will have heard of these various current alleged coup plots, and there are lots of people in custody and a number of different cases. So can you try and give us a concise summary of them, please?
this is basically, these groups, these alleged groups are basically thought of as the remnants of the NATO stay-behind groups that basically these establishments happened in almost all NATO countries across Europe. Their utility in Cold War was to basically act in a way that the French resistance had acted in World War II, basically stay behind in the case of a Soviet invasion and conduct bombing, assassinations, and other sort of asymmetrical fighting against Soviet invasion. So basically throughout Cold War, in all NATO countries, you had some of these groups. In Turkey, you had a branch of these groups, and basically the indictment, the legal case, connects this Ergenekon issue and all of these coup issues.
Sorry, let me just help our viewers then.
Remnants.
We keep hearing Ergenekon. Explain what that is and what it means in Turkish.
Ergenekon is basically part of Turkish nationalist mythology. It's kind of like the promised land narrative that we see, for example, in Jewish nationalist discourse, or for example, the Po Valley in Italy. It's basically a narrative of Turkish resurrection. It's basically, it's a mythology. We are not, there are competing arguments about its historical accuracy, but basically it's a kind of sort of mythological sort of place, this sort of a valley, promised land for the Turks that today exists in Central Asia. So that's basically what
it's basically being used as a code name. It's being used as a code name for an alleged coup. Is that right?
Yes, and basically it reflects the Turkish nationalist mythology of these, for example, pro-coup people.
And if I stay with you, just tell me there's another case called Sledgehammer. Help our viewers with that one as well.
Basically, Sledgehammer doesn't have any kind of, nationalist narrative or understanding in that case. Ergenekon is very old. It's basically, it ties to Turkish construction of nationalism in the early Republican period, while on the other hand, the Sledgehammer doesn't have that kind of historical or mythological sense to it. It's a code word. It's essentially a military code word for a coup practice, an alleged coup practice.
And Akin, before I bring in our other guests on this, how many people are currently being held, do you estimate, in Turkey in relation to these cases?
I don't know the specific number, but I know one data that I got from another research that I'm doing. Currently, Turkey is one of the top countries in terms of unconvicted prisoners. 47.7% of Turkey's prisoners are unconvicted, according to data I got from International Database of Prison Studies. So in that case, it's also more about how many people are held with these cases. It's also about the fact that Turkish legal system have clogged in general and specifically by these cases, which I'm sure other panelists will talk about the political aspect of these cases rather than the legal one.
Yes, and I want to ask Hassan about this. All these allegations of coups, do you think these were real coups?
Some of these people, as alleged, they were using the tactics and methodology of the Cold War. The military coup, you have to get prepared, and there will have some position within the society, and then some kind of a terrorism, arms caching within the soil, this and that. So it resembled the Cold War methodology. If it is real or not, or it is fabricated, we don't know. It's the judges to have to judge on this position. But there are some similarities of the Cold War military coup, so they are repeating the same kind of a scenario as we see now until what is being written from the newspapers. So most of the unconvicted people within the military, I believe, there are around 500 or 600 people, but there are some other unconvicted person because of the Kurdish terrorism. There are about 2,000 to 3,000 people. They are in the prison now waiting for the verdict.
Ergun, can I ask you the same question? Do you believe there were real coups being planned?
When you read the diaries of Özden Örnek, who was the chief of Navy, you can follow the preparations, discussions, and all thoughts in the military headquarters in Ankara. They were preparing for a military coup, and if the accusations are true, Sledgehammer was a military exercise which was done before the Iraqi war, the occupation of Iraq. So it was prepared for the worst case scenarios, and maybe there were some support for it.
Okay, Akin, but can I ask you this question?
States.
These were men in uniform. The Chief of Staff is now in court. He had 1 million men under his command. Why would he be involved in all these secret plots? If he wanted to do a coup, he could have done a coup, couldn't he?
But all regimes want the legitimacy. So to be able to have that, they have to entice people, to unite people behind military, convince them that it was necessary, that their choice was a mistake. The civilian government is taking Turkey as a kind of catastrophe. To be able to do that, they'll have to be murders, street demonstration, fight between different political groups, even with Kurds and Turks, etc. So it's not just taking the power. First of all, you have to convince domestic population, your own people, than the other countries in your Western countries.
Hassan, I want to ask you about this because we have this court case today involving events that took place 32 years ago, and we have all of these other allegations swirling around. It seems that Turkey hasn't settled the relationship yet between its military and its civilian government.
Yes, I think that the military couldn't really understood the situation, the world situation. After 1991, the conjecture in the Western world, maybe all over the world, is changed. So to continue to have the same patterns of behavior wasn't so helpful for them. That didn't understood very well.
Ergun, can I ask you to give us your view, taking the pulse of your country? How divided is Turkey still?
It's very divided with the minority of secular or Western-minded people. I call them secularists and conservative people. They have a different opinion, the role of the military or the action of the government or the personality of Tayyip Erdogan. I believe they have nightmares about the changes in educational system or women on the street with scarves or in the universities. It will take quite a long time for Turkey to be back to be normal.
Hassan, same question to you. How divided is Turkey, and is there the danger still of it resulting in violence and bloodshed?
Well, I don't think so. As I said before, the conjecture is quite different now. And we have different categories, you know. Highly secular, secular, moderately secular, moderately Islamist, and extremely Islamist groups. They are all together. If the economies goes well, everything will go well.
And if it doesn't, could they come to blows? If it doesn't, could they come to blows?
Anything can happen because the situation of the Middle East, any spillover coming from the Middle East, from Iraq, from Iran, from the clashes from Syria, and involvement of the big powers can cause that. Otherwise, Turkish people can understand and live together peacefully, I
Hassan,
believe.
you leave us on a sobering note. Thanks to our guests in Istanbul, Ergun Babahan, also in Istanbul, Hassan Koni, and Akin Unver, who was in Princeton, New Jersey in the US. And thanks to you very much for joining us. The Inside Story team would, as ever, like your comments, suggestions, and yes, even complaints. Note down our email and save it in your address book, insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'll be back 24 hours from now. Bye-bye.